Loneliness can be such a visceral, empty, and heavy feeling. It can often tip into despair because we feel like we'll just never be loved, that we'll always be alone, separate. Sometimes we can feel like we just don't belong anywhere. In this episode, we're going to discuss the little-known root of loneliness, 3 simple tips to help you when you're feeling lonely, and the one surefire method of taking all of the wind out of the sails of loneliness. And after the discussion, we get to the most important part. The group frequency calibration associated with this episode is where the frequency work happens and where change actually occurs. So be sure to listen to that. Without releasing distortion patterns targeted by the GFC, the change you want will be more difficult to attain because you haven't addressed the root of the issue. If you liked this episode, please hit the subscribe button. It helps us get our content to more people like you. And if you have your own tips on how you shift yourself out of feeling lonely, please leave a comment below. My name is Karen Cheong, and today in Mastering Your World Through Frequencies, we're discussing the root of loneliness and how to make it stop.
Loneliness can be a painful topic for a lot of people, actually. And some people can confuse it with being alone or feeling alone and loneliness. And I wondered if you could just explain the difference between the two and then tell us what the fundamental distortion pattern or patterns are for loneliness.
Yeah. Loneliness is a really hard thing because one time or other we've all felt that way. And to me, being alone and feeling lonely are totally different because you can feel lonely even if you're surrounded by tons of people. I mean, I felt lonely being with a group of friends, you know, and felt like I was an outsider and felt like I didn't belong and a whole bunch of other things, which didn't feel very good. But it had nothing to do with being alone physically. And so my feeling is that that loneliness feeling has more to do with an internal state than like your external circumstances of like being with other people or not, for example. Like I've seen people who are in intimate relationship with their partners and totally feel lonely and not seen in their relationship. So it's it can be a really horrible feeling. So from my perspective, to answer the second part of your questions, like where did this lonely thing come from?
Yeah.
You know, like what's up with that?
Yeah, is it learned? Because the reason why I say the difference between alone and loneliness, people think if they're by themselves, then, oh, they must be that lonely person. But they actually feel content.
Yeah, exactly.
So they take on this mantle of, oh, I'm lonely.
Yeah.
But then you, like you say, you've got the people that are in a group of people, they're in a community, but they still feel so lonely.
Yeah.
So what is that?
Yeah.
Inherent or fundamental thing that drives that
totally.
feeling?
And it's funny that you talk about the projection of loneliness. There's this famous meme on social media, and I don't know where it came from, and it's Keanu Reeves sitting by himself eating a sandwich. And it's called Sad Keanu, right? And all the picture is a man sitting by himself in a park eating a sandwich. Like, there's no
He's probably loving it.
And it's funny because people have asked him to comment on that. He's like, you know, I just wanted some space by myself.
Exactly.
I wasn't particularly sad. I wasn't particularly, lonely. I know I was on a film set and there's a lot of action going on in a film set and I just wanted some space by myself.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, to your point, that as a culture, if you're alone, then people will project like loneliness, sadness, all this stuff. Like, and it kind of went viral. Like, is Keanu okay? You know, he's like, I was just freaking eating a sandwich, people. You know what I mean? But I think it's interesting that we have that. So where that comes from, it's not learned. It's actually a really fundamental distortion. So to answer that, you have to understand what it means to like incarnate. So I think people will be like, oh, what's she talking about? So you chose to come into incarnation. I know for some people that's kind of a stretch because life feels hard sometimes and it can feel lonely and it can feel painful and it can feel like suffering. So you'd be like, why did I choose to come into this body?
Yeah.
You know, because for a lot of people, being in the physical experience isn't like a fun one.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you did choose to come into embodiment because it's a rare thing. And, the physicists have been saying for a while that 99.999% of everything is quote unquote nothing. It's not that it's nothing, it just has no form. And 0.00, whatever the correlating zeros to 1% is actually form or matter. So the fact that you get to have an embodied experience with all of its intensity, with all of the illusion, with all of the story, with all of the stuff is, although hard for us as a human, if you're infinite indestructible consciousness, it's kind of like a miraculous chance to experience something different, right? So from my perspective, we're all infinite indestructible consciousness. And if you're this massive infinite being, you know, to have this like finite experience is kind of like this amazing, strange experience that you get to have.
Yeah.
So we choose to embody. And when you choose to embody, you have to drop in your vibrational rate. So if you think about it, here you are as infinite indestructible consciousness, vibrating at a very high rate. And then to come into form, you have to drop in vibrational order in order to become physical. And when you do that, you drop through something that I have called and that other people call the veil of forgetting. And what is the veil of forgetting? So there's two things about the veil of forgetting that happen when you drop through it vibrationally. And the first is that you agree to and you forget that you are part of the oneness. Okay? So I know that doesn't sound like a big deal, but just imagine you've gone from feeling like utterly part of the one. So it's like, this is my hand, you know, like you can't forget that there it is, you know, how do you forget that you have a hand? It's right there, you know, it's the same thing, but even deeper. So it's like you're part of this oneness and an extremely important part of that oneness, and yet one part of it, you know, and we believe that we are separate and we believe that we are disconnected as a result because we forget. That is a huge thing. And that right there, that is the source of loneliness.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's a hard thing.
It's kind of strange. I mean, that's another conversation, but I kind of feel like I'd really want to know why we chose to forget.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
Why couldn't we just have the incarnation and remember?
Yeah, I know. And the thing is, I feel like part of the awakening process is that you get to have that. That thing that you just asked about. It's like, can we just incarnate and remember? My answer is you can, if your vibrational level is high enough. Our vibrational level has been really low because I feel like we kind of thought it would be this really fun game and experiment to see if we could transcend the forgetting. And we thought, okay, well, it's this obstacle and this challenge. And of course we're going to remember. Of course we're going to remember.
Why wouldn't we? It's so powerful, that connection, that source.
Yeah.
It's so omnipotent.
Yeah, and fundamental.
Yeah, so how could we forget?
Exactly. How could we forget? And then we did. And we're like, uh-oh. And then we went to sleep, really. Yeah.
So you're saying this whole fundamental distortion pattern related to loneliness is connected to this?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. It's that moment when we fell through the veil of forgetting and believed that we were separate and disconnected. And once that happened, this thing called loneliness happened. Because if you were if you think about it for a second, or even if you can imagine it, if you feel intrinsically that you're part of the oneness, you're never alone. You can never be alone. And I don't mean that in a creepy way. I mean it in a beloved way. You're always embraced. You're always held. And you know it. So the very opposite human experience is that you're separate and disconnected. I mean, how horrible is that? And that's why loneliness is so viscerally painful for us. You know, it just reinforces that I'm not connected to anything. I'm all alone in this world and no one cares about me and I'm just insignificant. You know, all that stuff we say to ourselves is based on that fundamental disconnection.
And so, because what I'm hearing when you're talking like that, there's a story running in our heads.
Yeah.
And everything has got to do with raising your frequency.
Yeah.
So we are running that story.
Yeah.
Subconsciously.
Yeah.
And we don't even know that we're running that.
Yeah.
So we are emitting a frequency that needs to confirm that belief, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So what would you say to people that do feel lonely?
Yeah.
And they're kind of resonating with what you're saying.
Yeah.
Maybe they're not fully understanding it because they don't know about this veil of forgetting. So what do we offer these people?
Yeah.
Do we have a solution?
Yeah. So the thing is, when you are in loneliness, you're in the illusion of separateness. Okay. So you feel separate. I mean, it's not really an illusion for some people. I mean, they really they feel it. They're like, I feel separate. Okay, from everyone and everything.
Yeah, not necessarily the source or
No.
the veil of forgetting, just from other people.
Yeah, other people, from things that matter.
I just don't feel part of anything. And so I don't belong anywhere. I just feel alone.
Disconnected.
Yeah, exactly. And this
Right.
terrible feeling of like emptiness and not belonging. And I feel like what happens with us, and I've been there, where you start to feel alone, it like spins up into a story, right? And we sort of start to amplify because we kind of go into like a little bit of victimhood around it, right?
Yeah.
Like we're disempowered, no one loves us, I'm always invited last, they're only asking me because I'm I'm not that important. Like all these things can go on in your head, you know? And it can just amp up and then we can start to focus in on it. And then we start to create it because we're amplifying that frequency that we feel. And what happens is you are broadcasting a frequency into the universe and something will show up to confirm that broadcast, to be like, oh yes, that's true. Because you're co-creating everything. And I know for a lot of people watching this, you might be like, I mean, if I were really co-creating everything, I wouldn't be co-creating this BS.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
I just wouldn't be.
Yeah.
But the thing is, whether you're aware of it, whether it's conscious or unconscious, you are co-creating everything. So that can be terrifying for some people to hear and also daunting, but also potentially very, very liberating.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's kind of like a bundle of all these things.
Because it sounds like you might have a solution.
Exactly. Exactly. And the thing is, if you understand that what you're broadcasting, you're creating because something in the universe responds to give you back that whatever it is that you're broadcasting, then you know that if you can shift what you are amplifying, what you're broadcasting, your reality will start to shift around you.
Yep. Okay, so how?
Okay, it's to stop the story. Okay, so how do you do that?
Yeah, how do you stop that story?
Because the story is in your head, right?
Yeah.
So here you are in the story, it's now amplifying, getting worse, etc. Okay, that story doesn't exist anywhere except for in your mind. So the thing about loneliness is often a mental process. So you're up in your head feeling lonely. Okay, so sometimes it's a future thing where you're thinking about how you're going to be lonely in the future and just reinforcing that. Sometimes it's in the past.
Because of something that happened in the past.
Yes, exactly.
And confirms how lonely you are.
Exactly. And that you deserve to be lonely and all that stuff. And then, of course, this experience like that you can be having right now, right? Just like, now I feel lonely. So my answer is twofold. Okay, so one is on the frequency level. Okay, so dealing with the distortion that causes the loneliness, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then there's like 3D things you can do to help you with that. So the first is to recognize that you're in loneliness. Okay, so I know it sounds weird, but even to vocalize like, I feel lonely, kind of gives you some distance from it. So naming it is really helpful, I feel like. You know, oftentimes when we're in it, we don't have distance from it. We're just in the emotion.
Yeah.
So I feel like naming it is helpful. The second is to become really present in your body. Okay, so meaning, for some people, that will mean that they have to do something physical, right? Like for me, I would take myself out for a run, or you could turn on music and dance. You could go do yoga. You could ride your motorcycle. You could, anything that puts you into flow state, right? Maybe it's cooking for you. Maybe it's woodworking. Maybe it's whatever it is. But whatever, when you start to create in that way and or move your body, you start to move the focus of your attention from here, which is where all that story is, into your body, which is not, there is no story in the same way in your body. Yeah. So that's another thing that you can do. So anything that will put you in a flow state. And then the other thing is,
I think also what you're saying is anything that requires attention outside of the head thoughts,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
So some sort of activity that requires you to pay full attention on that thing rather than on what your head's saying.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So, and the body is a great tool because if you're exerting in the body or doing something where there's movement, your focus is elsewhere. So to your point. Yeah. And then I feel like the other thing that is really helpful as well is something that we have said in the past, and which is singing. And if you're playing and singing, and if you can get into it and be like kind of be silly, give yourself permission to be silly and to sing. Like if you're rocking out to your favorite song and you're air guitaring or whatever you're doing. The thing about loneliness is a very serious feeling. It's heavy. It doesn't feel good to us.
Yeah.
But when we move into play and silliness and singing, it's joyful. And it can start to break that. Now, all of these things are helpful, but really to get to the root of the problem of loneliness, this is a distortion pattern. Okay? It's beyond your mind. It's beyond your feeling. It's the thing that causes your thoughts and your feelings. So if you listen to group frequency calibrations, you will start to be, first of all, pulled into your center, because that's what I'm doing when we're giving frequency work. But we're starting to address the root of the problem, which is the distortion pattern, which causes you to feel lonely in the first place.
Okay, so let's just, if we can, take a wee pause there.
Okay.
So when you're doing your frequency calibrations, you said it pulls you into the 0 point. So what does that mean for somebody that's new listening to that?
Yeah. So what I'm doing on frequency level is I'm bringing you into the present moment of time centered in your body.
Right. Okay. And so when you're working with this fundamental distortion pattern, how does that help? How a person listening to this and they get the 3D activity thing. Now you're talking about a frequency that can't be seen, heard for most people, right? And now you're saying that you can help clear that distortion, that frequency distortion.
Yeah. So what is a distortion pattern? I think is what you're asking.
How are you
doing that?
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like many people have experienced this situation where you get stuck in the same place all the time, right? Or certain emotions happen all the time, or certain thoughts happen all the time. And it doesn't matter like what you're doing to try to mitigate that. Those things are still there.
Yeah.
Okay. And the reason that those things are there, even though you're trying to do something to, release it, whether it's coaching or therapy or personal development or journaling or whatever it is that you're doing, you can maybe like abate it, but it doesn't go away. And the reason for that is because there's something called distortion patterns. So we're going to back up a little bit. So everything to me is vibrating, everything. And, the scientists have been talking about this for a while. So the rate of vibration is what dictates what the form is of the thing. Okay, so if you take, for example, water, and when the molecules are vibrating very high or fast, it's steam. And when the molecular vibration slows down, it's liquid water. And then when it slows down some more, it becomes solid or ice. Yes. So if you extrapolate that exponentially, you have pure source, right? Or the field or the oneness, whatever you want to call that extremely highly vibrating consciousness from which everything comes and to which everything returns. So that is vibrating at a very, very, very high rate that we cannot yet measure. When that field of vibration it is oneness. So when it wants to create something other than itself, there needs to be a drop in vibration. And then frequencies are formed. And when that vibrational rate slows down even more, it creates energy that we typically talk about these days. And when that vibrational rate slows down even more, it creates form or matter. It even creates our thoughts and emotions. So we have these things called distortion patterns, which happen when you basically drop into embodiment. So here you are, dropping your resonance to become physical. Because from my perspective, we are all infinite indestructible consciousness, wanting to have an embodied experience. So you drop in vibrational level to have an embodied experience. And what happens is around you, so from my experience, this is my perception, you have these spheres of pure source energy that come out of the oneness, vibrating at their own unique rates. And then what happens when you come into embodiment is like these layers and 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 layers of duct tape form around the sphere. Now, there's nothing wrong with the sphere. And you might ask, well, what happens then because of the layers of duct tape? Well, first of all, the sphere forgets that there's pure source energy all around it and that it can access it. And it slows down because duct tape's freaking heavy.
And where does the duct tape come from?
So the duct tape is the distortion patterns that I mentioned. So the duct tape are things like your lineage patterns. So like what your ancestors experienced. So even if it's like 20 generations ago, if they experienced war, it's going to affect how your genes express and the choices you make, even though you don't know them.
You're talking about the DNA and the patterns or the distorted patterns that are within the DNA that we're born into.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent.
Yeah, and this is the field of epigenetics.
Yeah, Bruce Lipton talks a lot about this.
Yeah, totally. So the field of science is starting to catch up. And then you have things like religious distortion patterns, your cultural distortion patterns,
right?
Your past lives. So
there's a lot.
There's a lot, right? So all these things are these layers of duct tape that are around you. And so what's happening is that because consciousness is rising, we're able to have people like myself who are high enough in their frequency resonance so that I'm able to work at the level of frequency.
Okay, just pause there.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say high enough in their frequency resonance, do you mean that you have cleared enough of your distortion patterns and have a better understanding of your true essence or being?
Yeah.
Being indestructible consciousness?
Yeah.
Right.
I don't think I could have said that better. So thanks.
So this is why you can work at that distortion pattern. Like I'm sitting here and I'm imagining, do you remember the science experiment with the glass and they had the perfect frequency note and they beamed it to the glass and the glass shattered?
Yeah.
Is it the same kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Yeah. So just like a tuning fork, like just to your point, right? So if you have two tuning forks, one will, if you ring one, the other one, even though it isn't physically touched, will start to vibrate. Right?
Yes.
So we're starting to work at that level now, where we can, with consciousness rising, we can start to work at this level. It doesn't have to be as hard as it used to be.
Yeah.
Where we can start to release these distortion patterns that happen at the level of frequency. That is, the thing is that people forget is that the physical mirrors what happens at frequency level. People always think the opposite. Like if I do this physical thing, it will cause this thing on spirit level to happen. I'm like, no, it's the wrong way that you're thinking about it. It's actually the thing that's higher in vibration dictates what happens at the lower vibrational order, which is your physical experience or your emotional and thought experience. So if you can change things at the distortion, if you can change or release distortion patterns at the spirit level, things reorganize on the physical level.
Okay, right. So if I'm sitting watching this, it's my first time hearing this, I'm thinking, right, so I have to, what's the fundamental distortion pattern of loneliness then? Is there one, or is it just that I've forgotten that I am indestructible consciousness?
Well, there's a number of things. Okay, so the first is, yes, it's a fundamental pattern of loneliness, and some people have it in greater layers than others. Okay, so for some of you, your lineage has really struggled with loneliness.
Right.
And so it's amplifying that basic pattern of loneliness.
So more duct tape on that one?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So for some people, like they just don't have as much loneliness. That it's not like their challenge in this lifetime. They may have trouble with money, for example, but loneliness is not their thing.
Yeah.
So my point is, there's more distortion in loneliness for some people. So it's a harder road in terms of their experience, the intensity of it for them, and what they have to release. Makes sense. Not necessarily hard to release, but more to release.
How much?
Yeah, how much? And then also, as you mentioned, there's this other thing which has to do with the separation, that original wounding from dropping through the veil. So I know for some people this is going to be a hard thing to understand, but it really is something very fundamental to us, and that is that we are beloved. Now, it doesn't feel like we're beloved, like, especially if you feel alone. You're like, I don't freaking feel beloved, so shut up, right? It's more like, I feel lonely. I feel like I'm not part of anything. I don't feel like beloved at all, right? If I did, then I probably wouldn't feel lonely. So the thing is, as you release your distortion patterns and as you rise in your vibration, you start to feel more like that oneness. And if you can clear enough of your distortions around a whole bunch of different things, loneliness included, non-worthiness, a whole host of other patterns, you start to recognize and feel that you are beloved exactly as you are by something that is far greater than another person. I'm not saying that love from another person isn't wonderful, but I'm talking about this infinite love, okay, that is far greater than any human love. And this is the love that pure source, the oneness, the one, whatever you want to call it, has for you infinitely. And as a human, I think it's really hard to understand that.
Yeah.
Right? Like, honestly, it's like a kind of a weird idea, potentially interesting, but when you feel it, it's unbelievable. Like, I remember the first time I felt it, it's unbelievable. I wept.
It's undescribable.
It's undescribable. And then it's like, you can't almost imagine that you forgot it in a way, because it's so vast, And when we find that, there is no loneliness. It can't exist in that infinite field of the beloved. And I know it might be hard for some people to understand or even to like imagine, but the thing is, you are beloved and you've just forgotten. And part of the journey of awakening, of rising in your vibration, is to remember that you are beloved and you are whole, and that the beingness that you are is enough. We always often feel like we're not enough, but you're more than enough, and you don't have to do something to deserve it. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to fast for 21 days. You don't have to wear white. You don't have to, do all the different things that people think they have to do. You just are. And it has to do with whether or not you're aware of it.
Yeah.
Rather than it being something deserved. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Or I think as well, what you're saying is it's not something out there.
Yes.
There's a lot of people that are wearing the white or fasting for the whatever periods of time or doing specific ceremonies because it's something that has to be attained.
Yes.
But it's already there, is what you're saying.
Yes.
We just have to
be aware of it.
Be aware of that. Yeah, exactly.
To get through all the mucky distortion that keeps you from recognizing that it's there.
Yeah. Okay, so to sum up this discussion, because ultimately, if it was me, I'd want the, let's just get to the root of the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
So what frequency calibrations would you recommend then? I mean, I don't want this to be about selling your products, but to me, it comes right back down to clearing the distortion pattern.
Yeah.
And if I knew how to do it, I would have done it by now.
Yes, exactly.
I wouldn't be watching this YouTube clip.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So if you listen to the group frequency calibration associated with this episode, which will be specifically on loneliness, it will help you to start to release those patterns. Now, if you're somebody who has challenge with loneliness, okay, and whether or not you're in relationship, out of relationship, it's just really hard for you, then you're probably going to want to go deeper, because it's probably a pattern that is sticky for you and is deep, especially if you've gone through something like a breakup. From some people who don't struggle with loneliness typically, but then they have a breakup or something like this, it can feel really horrible.
Yeah.
And I know I've felt that way before.
Yeah, me too.
So if it's something that is harder for you, then we do have a deep dive or a series of 3 GFCs on loneliness, because it can cause so much suffering for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
For those of you who would like to begin to release the loneliness distortion patterns, I strongly recommend listening to the group frequency calibration meditation associated with this episode. And if you know somebody who struggles with this, please share this video with them. We're about to start the group frequency calibration, or GFC, where we actually do the frequency work and where change is catalyzed. To get to the GFC, click on the square that'll appear to the right, or the link in the description below. It's time to bring in a new experience, a new consciousness, and a new world. Let's rise together.